us feeling lucid. The music from the boombox on that you spread. Yeah, I see you got your style, man, don't get it twisted. It's the way you rock, niggas getting lifted. So take a step back and see that you are gifted. Be lifted, it's vivid, you're living with no competition. It's you down, it can slap it back. Have to turn around, slip through the cracks, fall into the ground.
Whose stupid idea was it to have these bloody spiky feet on this? Whoever this was, your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries.
This is the SMSL VMV D1SE DAC, and this was sent to me for review by Apos Audio. Thank you very much, Apos, for sending this over. There is a link to the product page in the description. It's not an affiliate link. I don't use affiliate links. It's just a standard one. But this has quickly become probably my favorite sub $1,000 DAC, maybe tied with the Denafrips Aries 2. But if I had to pick one between the two of them, it would probably be this, for the simple reason that this is such a good all-rounder. This is good with every genre, every pairing, every situation I've put this in, and there isn't really anything that I can point to with the sound of this DAC where I go, it's not doing that so well. It should be doing that better for the money. It's just really good at everything. But I'll talk about the sound in a bit. Let's talk about the build first, because the build is also really good. It's a single piece of metal the whole way around, and it's got a nice matte finish, which is a little bit of a fingerprint magnet, but you can kind of polish that up and then you don't really need to touch it again. There's no text on the buttons. The display is sharp and clear. Let me get rid of these cables and show you the back. On the back, there is an auto-ranging power input, so you don't need to worry about whether this is an American or a European-specific version. You just plug this into the mains, don't need to fumble about with the switch, it'll just work. USB connector, which is quite recessed into the DAC, and that might cause some issues with some cables. I did actually have a cable which didn't work just because it couldn't plug in far enough, but most of them are okay. Optical and coaxial inputs, no AES, and that's probably just because of size constraints. It would have been tricky to fit an extra XLR connector on this. But you do get I2S, so you can use this with a nice DDC, which is cool to see. That's the connector for the Bluetooth antenna, which, because I don't use Bluetooth, I've just left that off for now because it looks sleeker without it on. Left and right balanced outputs and left and right single-ended outputs, which you can switch between these. You can actually disable one of them if you don't want the DAC to be playing to both at the same time. I'll show you that in a bit. I don't really like it when manufacturers pop the single-ended connectors on top of each other like that, because I can never remember which way around they are. But again, just size constraints. This is a pretty compact unit, so I understand why they had to do that. Normally, I'd show you what's inside. This is a little bit tricky to do just because where the power connector is connected, you can't really hold this open without risking damaging the DAC. So I'm not going to be showing you that on video, but I did take some photos, which will be shown on screen now. It's a pretty beefy linear power supply, none of the sort of plastiformer kind of things that you'd normally see on a lot of DACs, especially at this price. It's a nice transformer, there's a lot of filtering going on, and the output stage is a sort of hybrid discrete design by the looks of things. It's a really nicely laid out internal, and both the chassis, the PCB, and just about everything about this DAC, the build quality is lovely. So let's talk about the front again. Coming back round to the front, it continues this minimalist aesthetic. The edges are sharp, the buttons have no text, the display is sharp and clear, and one subtle detail I like is that they've gone with a red glow on the screen rather than a blue one, like on the cheaper SU9. I like the red just because it's a little bit more neutral. It kind of blends in, it looks more premium and pretty, but it calls less attention to itself. So this will just fit nicely in a desktop stack, in any kind of rack. It's a really good looking product. It's not flashy, it's really sleek. I like the design of this a lot. There's only two issues I've got with the build. One is that I've got a slight QC issue here where that knob's just a bit scratchy. It works fine, but it's just a bit annoying there. That's only on this unit though. I did try another unit, and I've also got the VMV A1, the amplifier companion to this, which uses the same chassis, and neither of those had it, so I think it's just this unit. What I don't like about the design though is this. These are the feet that come with the D1SE. You get these 4 spikes, 2 of which are slightly longer so that you can angle the front of the DAC up, and then these little pads or cups to have the spikes rest on like that. So the idea is you screw these into the DAC, put that on whatever surface you want to actually have the DAC going on, and then those just sit in there. But there's 2 problems. One, it's basically impossible to position these properly, because as soon as you want to make a small adjustment, it's just super grippy and the whole surface moves. You basically have to just pick it up, move it, and put it back down, which if you're trying to align 4 of them and hold the DAC at the same time, that makes it quite tricky. But also, even if you are just half a millimeter out, this now is slightly higher because that's a cone shape, which means the DAC is going to wobble. And it's basically impossible to get this to sit right without wobbling. And you've also got the risk of scratching whatever you put this on. If I wanted to put this on top of my preamp, for example, or a rack which is likely to get scratched, this, just one slight miss, that's it, the surface is damaged. So I didn't use these, I've literally just got these taken off. I really wish there was just a rubber foot or something instead, and I'm just using a coaster, because that's a lot easier than those spikes. They look nice, but I hate them. The display is super sharp and crisp, which is nice because that's where the menu is. You can press this top button to cycle between USB, optical, coaxial, I2S, Bluetooth, and then back to USB. This bottom button is pretty interesting because what you can do is you can press it and set it to XLR out, which means it's only playing through the XLR outputs. You can press it and set it to RCA out, so it's only playing through the RCAs, or all out, so it's playing through both. And that's great because then if I've got, say, a speaker system and a headphone system, if I want to listen to headphones, I don't want my speakers playing at the same time. So rather than fumbling with cables or actually having to shut my speaker amp off, I can just go boop. Now it's only playing through the XLRs, the RCAs going to my speaker amp aren't actually doing anything. Fantastic. I really wish more DACs had that feature. That's really, really helpful. Let's have a look at the rest of the menu, which you access by pressing this button here. So in here, I can change the inputs and the outputs like I just did now with the RCAs and XLR. I can change the oversampling filter for PCM. I've left this on fast linear just because that's what's standard on most DACs. It sounds the best to me. I don't like minimum phase filters. DSD filter, so you can change the cutoff frequency. Sound color. This is a pretty interesting one, and thank you very much to all of my patrons who helped fund the analyzer, because I was able to properly measure this DAC and see exactly what these are doing. Basically, it adds different levels and types of harmonic distortion. The crystal setting adds some third-order harmonic distortion to make things sound more crystal and sharp. The tube setting adds some second-order harmonic distortion to make things sound, in theory, more like a tube amp. And the rich option adds a little bit of both to make things sound more tonally dense and thick. I'm just going to leave it on standard for now. Pre-mode. This changes whether the DSP volume control is enabled or disabled. I'm just using this as a DAC, and I'm doing the volume control with my headphone amps, so I'm just using it in fixed mode right now. DPLL. This reduces the level of jitter on an incoming SPDIF, AES, or I2S source. The simple answer to using this, turn it to the lowest value that still works. If you turn it low and it starts dropping out or not having a connection at all, just turn it back up one notch. But other than that, just keep it as low as you possibly can. It doesn't impact the USB connection at all because that's asynchronous. So if you're using USB, it doesn't matter. You can change a couple of the settings for the I2S pinout, and you can change the dimmer and brightness for the display, so you can have that turned off if you don't want it on. And that's about it. So let's talk about how this DAC sounds. The sound signature of the D1SE is what I would describe as neutral done right, because there are some DACs which you can get which are obviously coloured in some way, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Coloration is just a personal preference question. But something like a Shit Bifrost 2, for example, which is quite far on the end of the spectrum because it doesn't sound normal, it doesn't sound natural or neutral. It's very far from that, but it's so much fun. I really like that DAC. It's weighty and slammy and forceful and dark and dense, and it's great for metal and rock. It's probably one of the best DACs you can get for those genres. But maybe you want a bit more resolution. Maybe you want a bit more soundstage. And so you go for something like a Denafrips Aries 2. Now this is still a somewhat warm-sounding DAC, but it's got more soundstage, it's got a bit more resolution, it's got more sort of space between the instruments. It's lovely for classical and orchestral. The timbre and the richness it adds to it is it's wonderful. But it's a bit slow for electronic genres. So maybe you go for something on the other side of the spectrum. You go for an RME ADI2 or a D1SE, because it's really resolving and it's quick and it's snappy and fast, but it's a bit thin and sterile sounding. And so when you listen to acoustic music, this body of instruments and vocals isn't quite the same as it should be, and it sounds a little bit, thin and maybe artificial. So what do? If you want the resolution of a D1SE, but you want some more warmth, you want a bit better soundstage, maybe you want some more force to the low end, you look at this, because this is just sat comfortably in the middle, just doing everything pretty damn well. I say neutral done right because this is not sacrificing anything compared to the resolution of a D1SE. The D1SE is an impressively resolving DAC, but I didn't like it that much just because it was too thin and sterile. This has the exact same level of detail retrieval. I couldn't tell a difference in that particular area between the two, but it's warmer, it's more full and natural sounding. It's not going to add warmth and body like an Aries 2 would, but it's not thin and missing stuff like an ADI2 or an D1SE would. The ADI2, the original one, that one was pretty clinical. The Pro model was better. I don't know why, I don't know what's different, but the Pro model did sound better. But anyway, this is just a really well-rounded sound, and it's closer to what I would consider neutral and natural. It's not adding anything, it's not missing anything, and you can throw any genre you like at this and it's going to sound great. So, starting with The Devil's Trill by Tartini. This is a wonderful song, it's a wonderful recording, and you should join my Discord because I post all of my music on there before I use it in videos. And the backstory to this track is pretty interesting too. The composer, Tartini, said that the devil appeared to him in a dream and played violin, and that it was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard in his life, and that when he woke up, he immediately tried to recreate it and write it down, but what he recreated was so inferior to what I had heard that if I could have subsisted on any other means, I would have broken my violin and abandoned music forever. Basically, it's Tenacious D's tribute, but the original thing. In any case, let's listen to what he recreated. Instruments just appear out of absolute blackness, nothingness. And blackground, as some people call it, is kind of something which R2R DACs typically do better. But I actually think this might be doing it slightly better than the Aries 2 did. And this is an interesting one because ESS actually has a document written up, which I'll link to in the description if you want to read, talking about how distortion performance and DC offset can be correlated in some instances. And that's not something which is going to happen the same way on an R2R DAC. So that could be the reason for this, why blackground is typically better on an R2R DAC. But in any case, this DAC's doing it really, really well. Detail retrieval on this is just wonderful as well. It is more detailed than an Aries 2. The absolute low-level information that it brings forward is definitely better. Timbre is good on this. It's really good and it's certainly not bad, but the Aries 2 does just edge it out there. The Aries 2 it's got this warmth to it, but at the same time it does present instruments in a slightly more natural and realistic sounding manner. It's slightly better than this, but the detail retrieval on this is a little bit better. So kind of depending on your preferences, one may win out there, depending on what genre you're listening to. If you're listening to this kind of thing, I would probably pick an Aries 2, specifically for classical. But this is really not far behind, and this does leave the Aries 2 quite far behind in other genres, which we'll get onto in a sec. The spatial cues as well are just absolutely fantastic. The way that things reverb around the recording environment, it's wonderful. And this DAC can get big. Let's do something a little bit sort of busier. This is the Red Bull Symphonic album, which is a really cool album because basically what they did is they did an orchestral hybrid rendition of electronic tracks by Camo and Crooked. And the result is pretty cool. This is satisfyingly huge, is the best way I can put it. It's really, really expansive. Now, this track doesn't show off layering and kind of positioning within the soundstage so well because everything's pretty far away other than some of the synths, which are pretty close and sort of inside your head. But it does get big, and it shows off just how expansive the soundstage on this DAC can be. Really interesting album. I like that one a lot and would recommend that you go and give it a listen. So, this DAC can get big, the detail retrieval is fantastic. The timbre it's not world leading or anything. There are definitely DACs which handle timbre better, including at its price point, the Aries 2, but not without drawbacks. And it's certainly no slouch, it's doing it very nicely. So this is Tear You Down by Fab Beat, and what this shows off is how well this DAC does low end overall, because some DACs like the Ares 2, it can do the weight and force and rumble, the deep sub-bass stuff for an organ in an orchestra, for example, really, really well. Bass guitar, excellent. But when it comes to synthetic stuff or kick drums, the immediacy isn't quite there in the same way as it perhaps should be. And then you go to something like an ADI2, and it's got that crack and that massive force on the first kick, but then not much body. There's not really much slam, as people would describe it, not much rumble. It makes it sound a bit thin. This does both properly. It's got that force and that immediacy, and it's got the body, timbre to drums, and presence overall for bass that it just should have. It's doing all of it really well without any problems.
Just feel, yeah. I could tell you down, but it's a sunset on a Sunday. We got our own flex, I'm coming my way. I can tell you representing in your own.
So the kick drums are really, really forceful, really, really impactful. They're fun and playful. But then that synth, which continues on after each one, that's pretty forward as well. It's not bloated and bloomy, because some DACs that might be, if it is not got enough definition, it'll come off as just sort of general bass energy muddiness, which isn't happening here. You can hear really clearly all the oscillations of that synth. But it's not too much. It's just the right amount. It's just doing things as you would expect if you were the mastering engineer for this track.
Your own sense, and there's some truth in what you say. We have our own faith. I can take it down, you can slap it back. I can turn around, slip it through the cracks, fall into the ground. Can we get it back? I can take it down, I can take you down, but it will come around.
This is a fun track. I like that one. So it's doing bass drums really, really well. It's doing synths really, really well. It's just balancing things. It's not too forceful and overly energetic, but it's not bloomy and muddy. It's not making things sound too dense. And even when you throw something kind of challenging at it, you do a sort of distorted, almost purposefully messy sort of sound like the end of Battle Lines by Bob Moses, it doesn't even break a sweat. It just keeps doing everything it should be doing. It doesn't get claustrophobic. It doesn't lose any kind of layering or detail retrieval performance. It's just really good. This track on 1266 is absolutely nuts, by the way. If you have a 1266, go and listen to this before you continue on with the video. You've got the kick drums super forceful and fast. You've got that rumble continuing on without obscuring anything else. The definition of that guitar and the spatial cues are all still there. Nothing's bothering anything. The separation is great. The detail retrieval is great. The soundstage is great. The low end is great. The only thing which this could be maybe doing a bit better, if I were to say that's probably the priority for upgrading, is timbre. It's good. It's just not quite the same as an Ares 2. But then the Ares 2 does have some other drawbacks in that it's not as resolving, and the low end is definitely a fair bit slower than this, which make it less genre universal. It's better for acoustic music only, but then this is great for everything. And the differences where this falls behind the Ares 2 are a lot smaller than when the Ares 2 falls behind this. Let's keep playing this track a bit. I really like this DAC, and this review might be a little bit shorter than normal just because it's hard to describe when something doesn't necessarily have any problems. A lot of the time you can talk about stuff and you go, this is good, this isn't so good. For this price, nothing about this is bad. Everything is good, and some things are great. The detail retrieval is great. The soundstage is really good. This is just a really good product. If you are considering buying this, do it. If you only listen to classical music, the Ares 2 might be better. If you only listen to rock and metal, the Bifrost 2 might be better. but for anyone else, or if you listen to a mix of stuff, the D1SE is fantastic. If you'd like to talk to me and other Wiggly Air enthusiasts about gear, music, or anything at all, then join the Discord server at goldensound.audio/discord. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon, then you get access to the private supporters-only Telegram chat. We're also planning to do a meet at hopefully CanJam New York and CanJam London in the near future. And a huge special thank you to my Crazy Summit 5 people, Chief Big Time, Dan Mellinger, Fake Aussie Accent, G'day Mate, Joe, Commodus, Ross Kyle, and Dizarasta, my Legend tier patrons, Gravitas, Chandler Bassett, Chris, CK Yozizawa Zoo, Dwayne Butler, and Jithan the Shiba, and my Diamond tier patrons, Adam Cardos, Beanbo Owito, Beefy Fish, Daniel Hibiak, Clockmeister, Gizmo1K, Jean R, King Jong-un, Luxifer, Nick McKay, and Pokey. Thank you guys so much. You are fantastic. Support from patrons like you and sponsors like headphones.com is what allows me to acquire things for the channel like the analyzer in order to make this kind of content. So thank you so much to everyone who has contributed to that. I hope you had a Merry Christmas, and I hope 2022 is a good one.